More questions? Who are there?
Is there a right of appeal from a military commission, and does the appeal apply to rulings of evidence, etc., and to the decision of the court?
Yeah, the way it's set up, there are actually 4 layers of appeal. I mean, one of the things I used to really hate when I was on the prosecution side is people would say, they'd hold up Nuremberg as like this gold standard of justice. But at Nuremberg, there were no appeals. Once the sentence was announced, they were, swinging from a rope within a week. In the military commissions, there are 4 layers of appeal: to the convening authority, to the Court of Military Commission Review, to the D.C. Circuit, and to the Supreme Court. So there's an extra layer in there that as a service member I wouldn't get.
And also, just that's a feature of the revised military commission system. In the initial military commission system, there were no appeals to civilian courts or anything but a newly created appellate panel handpicked by the Secretary of Defense. And that was all that was in the first one. Anthony,
can I ask you a practical political question, or maybe impractical political question? This comes along the line of what went wrong, because I'm hoping that next time around this doesn't. So Obama established these task forces, right, that sort of surrounded this issue one way or another. And basically, it was a discussion between extremes, right? And the idea was to take everybody, as I understood it, the president's idea was to take all these different opinions and passions into play. And so people kind of gave on maybe their extreme versions. Is that now a mistake? Because it seems that in the negotiation of what you'd give up and what you'd take, and I don't mean you personally, but each side, somehow the entire project was lost before we knew it. And do I have that wrong? Is that?
I think a couple things. I mean, what went wrong? There were some very good people. This is where I will cede to the chair. There were some very good people who I interacted with who were doing the client review of the files, taking the 200, 300 or so, and then marching through them to see where they had evidence, would it hold up. And from what I hear from people's reputation, from a couple of hours of speaking with them and hearing more about how they interacted with other lawyers, working with NACDL and the ACLU lawyers, I think they had some very competent people doing that part of the review. That task force, I think, was among the best ones. The ones that are looking more at the policy, which was not these group of guys, but another group, which was interdepartmental of DOD, State Department, DOJ. I think you have to go back and look at this is a great idea because you're giving me an idea for what we should do next. You go back to the words of the executive order. It sounded so strident and so bold, and yet when you read the fine print, there were a lot of mays in there. The Department of, the Attorney General was put as the chief to review the Guantanamo policy. And he was to do so in consultation, I'm doing this all on memory, with the Secretary of Defense. Why even you would have included the Secretary of Defense in that kind of leadership role, especially when they enumerate the agencies that were a part of it, they had the Joint Chiefs of Staff, if I remember correctly. So you set up a process that you tried to hedge what was a pretty unconditional promise, but you gave yourself some wiggle room in case you needed to kind of back out of it. And I think that part of what you do in politics is if you keep your own exit door at least marked for you on the way out, your opponents are going to push you out the exit door and not let you walk in the front door the way you want. And I think, frankly, the idea that it was his first promise in office, and yet everything else got behind the healthcare bus, didn't work to his advantage. It's notable that that this administration, I think, if they accomplish healthcare, would be a success for them. But the lack of success everywhere else, this is an administration that couldn't walk and chew gum. I mean, they weren't able to push through a lot of other promises they made, and they keep throwing balls in the air. Don't ask, don't tell in the State of the Union speech. 1 year, another ball in the air. Immigration reform, another ball in the air. And frankly, I would have preferred, I say this in retrospect, and I gave a big party after the executive orders, I would have preferred deferring this rather than just announcing this and then letting it be the stepwife to another agenda that would soil your ability to get this done. You take a bite of the apple, you want to eat the whole thing. Don't put the apple down for a year and come back to it and still think it's going to be healthy.
I think what went wrong in the context of the federal criminal trials, Karen, is that hesitation. If on November 13th, Attorney General Holder made the announcement that these trials would be in New York, and they delivered them to New York on the 14th, which obviously they had to give a 45-day notice, but they could have given that back in July. For these, if they were here on the 14th, this case would be underway, and there wouldn't be any question about it. And all of this politicking and grandstanding and red herrings and fear mongering would be fall on deaf ears, because the case would be ongoing without the problems that everybody, the Chicken Little atmosphere that's here, because it can be done without that.
The only thing I'll add
And
to
the same
that.
thing with Guantanamo. With Anthony said, you say it in January, you don't do anything about it until, November.
Look, even the stage crafting of the announcement of the Guantanamo trials coming to New York was fundamentally fumbled, if you play football. If you want to announce that right, you'd have the Attorney General make the announcement, you'd have some of your great U.S. attorneys in the room flanking them, you'd have the mayor speak, you'd have Ray Kelly up there, you'd have Nadler, some silking stock Republicans from the Upper East Side. You put them all up on the dais. You all make them cheer for the announcement. You all give them a little bit of the love and the print and the ink and the Klieg lights. When you go it alone, just by making a phone call the morning of, haven't made the allies you need locally. It's politics. It's anyone who stages an event. We always figure out that you have to balance it out. That's why I think Mo and I and Josh are on this panel. Karen wanted to have some balance. Someone who would say the military commissions can work. And I think, frankly, that that's unacceptable from professionals who have to manage politics. In the biggest announcement of the Attorney General thus far, I think it's absolutely inexcusable for them to have handled it this way. And from private conversations of members of Congress, it was their egos more than their concerns about money and security that were most snubbed and then ended up in this context.
I guess I would just say, if they do decide to go the military commissions route, then I think it ought to be turned over to DOD and become a military mission. Like the current chief prosecutor is John Murphy, who worked for me. He was a DOJ attorney. He's a great guy, but now they put a uniform on him and made him, the chief prosecutor of the military commission. And that was always kind of the game when I was there. DOJ looked at the cases, thought they would not stand up in Article III courts. So we'll put a military uniform on it and call it a military commission, but we'll pull the strings behind the scenes. So I think they ought to make a decision on which route they want to go. If it's going to be in Article III courts, and get DOD out of it and make it a DOJ function. But if you're going to call it a military commission, then give it to the military and get the executive branch, the DOJ part, out of it.
Are you assuming that the military wants it? But there has been a lot of conversation recently that perhaps some of the people at the Pentagon want it, but the military, the legal corps of the military, the JAG Corps, may not want it. Is this what you hear?
Yeah, well, the uniform side, the Judge Advocates General from the start, from back to 9/11 and 2001, have, I think, if anything good has come of this, is the reputation of military attorneys and judge advocates. That they were the ones that were standing up and say, do the right thing, apply the Geneva Conventions, treat these guys as POWs. And it was the political appointees, the big brains that had never worn a uniform a day in their life, that wanted to go a different route. So, the military, we're kind of getting left holding the bag. After 8.5 years, we've created this mess. Now, here, take it and fix it, is a tall order.
Okay, well, our time is out, but I think that I can't sum up everything, but I think that the lack of leadership, a lack of an articulate mission, has really left many in the room feeling a little bit disappointed about the course of events. I think also the fact that I couldn't ask a prosecutor to come up and talk here, or a representative from the Department of Justice, because it's not their job to argue this case, makes it even harder to educate the American public about what's at stake here. So I hope you've learned something, and I hope we see you next time. Thank you for coming. Thank our panel.